Hello and welcome to Tommie Media's Tommy Chalk Talk, where we go beyond the box score and take a closer look at St. Thomas sports. My name is Jake Remes, alongside me Tom Pitzen. So Tom, Glenn Crusoe and the Tommies coming off another playoff win, this time against Wabash, sort of a run-heavy team. It was a good game. I personally thought that the Tommies really won the battle in the trenches up front, and that's sort of what paved the way for them, as we mentioned in our previous Chalk Talk, for a victory. What do you think were the difference makers this week?
Well, exactly that. We talked about last week that it was really two teams that were mirror images of themselves, and it was really going to come up to the battle up front. Tommie's big offensive line versus a defensive line from Wabash with a bunch of standouts, including the Conference Player of the Year. And St. Thomas did win the battle up front. Didn't really go off for a lot of yards, but they got just enough to get that win.
Sure, and then coming into this week, they've got Linfield, team out of Oregon. Also had a very good season, obviously, to make it this far in the playoffs, but they've done so in a different way than Wabash and St. John's, per se, have done so. What's different about this Linfield team?
Well, we talked about the two teams that are similar, the big running games and the big offensive line and defensive line. This team really likes to spread it and throw it all over the field. They're on their backup quarterback, Tom Connect, did come in for injury in place of Sam Riddle, their starter, in the previous week's playoff game, and he played all of the game against Mary Hardin-Baylor, but he still threw for 492 yards and 5 touchdowns. Now, that being said, he also threw 3 picks. So St. Thomas defensive backs can really jump on that.
Right.
But Linfield only ran for 31 yards in that game, 492 to 31. I wouldn't call them one-dimensional, but you can definitely tell that they like to drop back and throw the ball. St. Thomas, on the other hand, got some good plays on special teams. Waldvogel's punt return, obviously. Dowdle's fake field goal ran it in. St. Thomas really opportunistic, whereas Linfield, you can kind of see that they rely on their passing game heavily.
Sure, taking shots all the time is sort of something that St. Thomas defense has thrived on so far this year. But also touching again on this Linfield team, coming off an overtime win just by a field goal as opposed to the Tommies running away with a 30-plus point win. What do you think those different wins in their quarterfinals, what effect is that going to have on this semifinal game?
Well, both teams were kind of tested in their own way. Linfield, a team that's run up 70 points 3 times this year, not really anything close in the regular season. St. Thomas had the first St. John's win, the second St. John's win, kind of close, relatively speaking, whereas Linfield was really tested for the first time against Mary Hardin-Baylor. Obviously, you saw that they came out with it, that 38-35 victory, opportunistic, jumping on a botched snap, if you will, by the Crusaders and marching right down the field, kicking the game-winning field goal as time expired. But St. Thomas, I think, benefits more from having these close games against teams that they really had to grind it out against. Because if they run into adversity, you know that you've been there before and you've battled through it.
Yes, I mean, there hasn't been a game where the Tommies have been faced with a serious situation late in the fourth quarter, but they've had their halves.
Yeah, they haven't trailed. They haven't trailed in the second half at all this season, but they have been held scoreless in the first half. They've had early deficits. You're thinking of the Concordia game. You're thinking of the Bethel game, things like that. So they have been tested a little bit more, relatively speaking, than Linfield.
Fans need not worry if it's a slow start or something. St. Thomas has been in those types of situations before, and they'll be able to figure it out if they do find themselves there. So.
Yeah, and if Linfield comes out and throws the ball all over the yard, I'm sure Wally Kaczynski, I don't know if we've talked about that quite enough, the job that he's done. They held Wabash. Yeah, they held Wabash over, I think it was 220 yards, just under 220 yards, or close to it. That's a high-powered team with a big, huge back in Mason Zurich that St. Thomas held in check. Now, it's going to be a different test. Moses Aquinobi, Jordan Young will get tested on the outside more so than they have. But I think they've passed every challenge up to this test so far this year.
That's kind of the point I was making as well. So, well, thanks for joining us on this latest edition of Tommie's Tommy Chalk Talk. If you have a question, tweet it to @TommieMedia. Once again, for Tom Pitzen, I'm Jake Remes, and we'll see you hopefully next week should the Tommies win in the semifinal game in Tommie Media's Tommy Chalk Talk.